I told you there was nobody here.
Yeah, I know it, Emma. I know that. I just wanted to tell you one thing, just in case you was to see that fella. Now, don't say a word about my boat being hid down there by the lake underneath that clump of bushes. You know that clump of bushes is so very near your dock. If that fella was to find that boat, he could row clear across to Sandy Point and get away as slick as a whistle. And not a word about that. Now, you promise?
I promise.
You know something, lady? You got a mighty obliging sheriff in this town. Real helpful.
Well, as good as.
Well, where's he?
Right out there's your man, Captain.
Orders. Binoculars. You fool! You let him get away. Why didn't you shoot?
Well, in the first place, if I'd have shot, why, I might have hit him, and I figured you'd rather have him alive. Then in the second place, he might have shot back, and I'd rather have me alive.
Think you can get him with a telescopic sight?
I can try, sir.
Well, there ain't any real need in that.
What?
Well, that's pretty far range out there. Besides that, well, he'll come back peaceful enough.
Taylor, I don't know how you got to be a sheriff in this state, but when this is over, I'm going to see that you're thrown out. There's no place for such incompetence as a peace officer.
That's our boat, ain't it, Paul? You let him take it on purpose, didn't you?
I sure did, son.
It's sinking.
Yes, sir, it sure is.
That's because it leaks. I'm pointing it all the time.
Captain, if you'll take your men down this little road down there at the shore, I imagine he'll swim right to you.
All right, let's go, men.
You know, this morning when we was fishing, I sure didn't enjoy having a hole in that boat. I'll tell you the truth right now, I wouldn't take $1.25 for you.
So we are still going to just introduce the book of 1 Peter this morning. Last week, we looked at the fact that there was a group that Peter was writing to who were scattered. And they were scattered only but for a season. And we tried to get some perspective with that. You know, in my life, I don't know about yours, but on my phone, I get people calling me and they want to extend my car warranty. They want to do something with my house, either put a roof on it or a security system. I get all these numbers, and I've gotten to the point to where if your name is not in my phone, I just don't answer it. I figured you can leave me a message. It's funny, they're so concerned about extending my car warranty, but they rarely leave me a message when I don't answer it. And, you know, the opposite thing happens as well. There are times when I'm trying to get a hold of some of you. And, well, I mean, like Raquel. There's been times where I've tried to get in touch with Raquel, and I can't get in touch with Raquel or Jesse. And so I called their daughter. You weren't supposed to laugh at that. So I'll call Chloe. Well, Chloe will answer. And she answers even though she has my number. See, now, I figure it's on you if you do that. If you answer my call and you have my number, that is totally your fault. That's on you. It's not my fault. And that's what I'll tell Chloe. I said, this is on you completely because you knew better and you answered it anyway. So sometimes we don't know better and we answer it. But as we're looking at a letter, you know, we go through the mail, and there's usually, you know, I thought about what I should have done for this sermon series. I should have saved all the junk mail from the last month in our household and brought it up here on stage. You know, it comes and we don't even open it. There's so many things that go, we don't open it. We look on the back. Now, if it doesn't have anything and it's kind of handwritten, we say, maybe this is from somebody we know and we actually care about, and it's not a bill. They're not going to put us in jail. So we'll open it and then we'll get fooled. And then we'll just, they've tricked us. But it's nice to know who you're getting stuff from, either a cell phone, a call, or either, with caller ID, or it's nice to know, who you're getting mail from. I have somebody that I call and we'll be talking and they'll say, oh, my wife's calling, I got to get this, and they dump me for their wife. Why they would do that, I don't know, but it happens. And so, as we look at this book of 1 Peter, I think it would be helpful for us to stop and look who wrote this letter. Because if it's somebody that matters, if it's somebody that can bring some information into our lives, we need to know that. We need to know their background. 3 nights ago, I got a phone call. It was about 9:45, and it was from my college roommate. You haven't met him. I mean, some people in church have met him, but that was years ago. And we have not seen each other probably in 8 to 10 years. And my first thought was, okay, something's wrong if he's calling me this late at night. And we were just reminiscing. He was just hearing a certain song clicked, and he said, man, I remember when we used to work, and when we'd get off work at 11 o'clock at night, we'd go bike riding to this song, and just reminiscing, and then we kind of got caught up. But when you get a phone call from people, and you see their name, automatically, you kind of go back and you kind of figure out, what the topic is going to be about. If you have their name, their history, kind of what they're going to be bringing to the table. And I think it would be helpful as we get into 1 Peter for us to look and see who this is being sent from. In the passage that Raquel read, it kind of gives us a snapshot of who this guy is that wrote this letter. Because on the one hand, it gives us the best that there is of him. Insightful. His arm, he could pat himself on the back. What's the answer to the question? You're the Christ, the Son of the living God. And he says, attaboy, Peter, you got it. In fact, I'm going to build my church upon this statement, upon this information that you have so wisely made available, that I am the Christ. People are having questions about me, who I am, but you know. And so I'm going to build my church upon that. In fact, you are going to be given the keys. And at this point, Peter's like, he's smiling real big. Because the rabbi, the teacher, has told him some things in front of other people. He's addressed him in front of other people to make him feel proud and that he matters. And there's got to be a little bit of Peter that says, I wonder if the other 11 dudes could have figured this out. I wonder if it's just me that could have figured this out. Because he sure has given me some kudos, attaboys. He's given me the keys for this answer. I didn't know it came with this prize. And then in just a few verses later, when he says, I've got to suffer and die, Peter says, since I am important here now, come along. He says he takes him aside and he rebukes him. And he tells him, don't talk about that. That's not going to happen. Not for you. I've seen what you can do. I've seen the miracle. I've seen people rise from the dead. I've seen healings take place. There is no way. There is no army on this planet that can possibly put you to death. And right away, Jesus snaps back. Get thee behind me, Satan. And he put everything in perspective, because when he answered the first time, you're the Christ, the Son of the living God, Jesus wanted to make sure, look, you didn't come to this through your own reasoning. The fact of the matter is, heaven revealed this. The Father revealed this to you, this information. In fact, when you go to your own dictionary and wealth of books, what you end up coming up with is information that's more akin to Satan. So he get thee behind me, Satan. From then on, Peter kind of went, okay, I know my place. Peter was a person that he didn't so much think through things that his heart, he would just jump in things with all of his heart. When Jesus is walking on water, he says, let me come to you. He says, come on. And he gets out there, he starts walking, then he looks at the waves and he starts sinking. He has these moments where, there's clarity. There's one that's one of my favorite moments. It's in John chapter 6. We don't have it on the stage, on the screen. But people are following, the masses are following Jesus, and then Jesus gives a hard statement that people have a real trouble with, and so people start to leave. And all of these throngs of people start to leave, and Jesus turns to the disciples and says, are you going to leave too? And Peter has this moment of clarity when he says, where else would we go? You alone have the words of life. And it's like Peter's thinking, as silly and as crazy as some of the things you say, things that I don't really understand, the options out there aren't much better. I can't think of a better option. And the problem must be on my understanding rather than what you're saying. So where else would I go? When we look at Peter, Peter has actually 4 names. His Jewish name is Simon. His Hebrew name, I should say, Simon, or Simeon. Simeon was one of the brothers of the 12 brothers of Jacob. And that was his Hebrew name. He had the Aramaic name of Caiaphas, meaning rock. And then Jesus calls him Peter, the rock. And most people think it's because of that statement that Raquel read in Matthew chapter 16, that he was going to be the rock. Now, when you think of the rock, what might come to your, besides Dwayne Johnson, what might come to your mind is some Old Testament verses. Whenever there's a talk about, a rock or something, or some placement, some item, when there's something that happens like that in a name change, you go back and you say, okay, what's going on here? And so there's a couple of verses that kind of give us a picture of the way Peter might have thought of himself as a rock. One is Isaiah 51, verses 1 and 2. Listen to me, you who pursue righteousness and who seek the Lord. Look to the rock from which you were cut and to the quarry from which you were hewn. Look to Abraham your father and to Sarah who gave you birth. When I called him, he was only one man, and I blessed him and made him many. He's telling Israel here, he says, you were carved out of a rock. And when you think of that rock and you think of Jesus' sermon, there's stability there. That Jesus, out of all of the peoples of the earth, not because they were smarter than anybody else, not because they were more plentiful than anybody else, but because he chose them, and we talked about this a little bit last week, but he chose them to make a people that he could display to the rest of humanity about his love. And he uses this term here, look to the rock from which you were cut. He'll picture in Genesis, we won't go there, but of Abraham being that rock, that strong piece, that bastion of material that he will make Israel out of. So, in some respects, the rock is about Israel. And Jesus is going to create a kind of a new Israel, a different Israel. Not someone to replace, but a people. He's going to place that on this rock, on Peter and Peter's statement. He's going to say, for a while, for a season, I'm going to have an entity, the church. And it's not going to replace Israel, but it's also going to be built on a rock. Just like Israel can be considered a rock. Well, then, if you're continuing to read and you read in the Old Testament, there's other times that a rock shows up. There's a point in time in Israel's history to where they had disobeyed God, and God punishes them by scattering them, by dispersing them, by taking them off to a foreign land. And Daniel talks about this, about when this occurred. And so the King Nebuchadnezzar, has a dream. And this dream, he wants his advisors to be able to tell him what this dream means. And so they're trying to think through. He won't even tell them what the dream is. They're thinking through what this dream is. And this dream is about a statue that he sees. And this statue is built with different material. It has, gold and silver and bronze, and then clay and iron and clay mixture. And so Daniel is given wisdom to interpret this dream. And so this is just part of what this dream says. In Daniel chapter 2 and verse 45, here's what it says. This is the meaning of the vision of the rock that's cut out of the mountain. But not by human hands, a rock that broke the iron, the bronze, the clay, the silver, and the gold to pieces. There's this image of this rock that ends up being taken out of a mountain and ends up going and smashing this image of the governments, of the world powers. And so when Peter's thinking, rock, he's probably thinking, this is part of it. In other words, using the term rock was not a slacker term. It was not a demeaning term. These are the images that came with that. And when you look at Peter, Peter has the highs and the lows. Peter's somebody that when you listen to what he says, you know he's been there. Because Peter has perspective. Peter sees life from a bigger perspective than others might see life. Have you ever talked to someone who is an expert in everything, who had done nothing? Have you ever talked to somebody who knew how to do everything, but they hadn't done anything? That's not the way it is with Peter. When you got a call from Peter, you would answer it because you knew, because of life, because of good choices and bad choices, he'd made choices, and he knew the consequences of those choices. There would be a time when Peter would tell him, no matter what these other 11 dudes do, the fact of the matter is, I will stay with you. I will even die for you. And he makes that pronouncement. He makes that show in front of everybody, in front of these 11 guys. And he says, however you might say people will turn their backs on you, I will never do that. Just a few hours later, Jesus had told him right after that conversation, hey, you're not going to die with me. And in fact, you're going to deny me not once, not twice, but 3 times. And just a few hours later, he'll be warming himself by a fire in the early morning hours. And on the 3rd time, a servant girl, somebody of no stature or nobody that has any influence, will say, didn't I see you with him? Aren't you one of his followers? And Peter will deny that he even knew the Messiah. And at that moment, a rooster will crow. And Peter knew at that time the rejection. He knew that time, I am so exposed here. I am so exposed. He said, because not only would Jesus know, but me and my big mouth made such a show of it, all 11 would know. And so he walks dejected and rejected. And just a few days later, a couple of weeks later, in fact, after Jesus rose from the dead, they'll be up in Galilee and fishing. And Jesus will meet with them. And Jesus will tell Peter, Peter, do you love me? Peter's a different guy now. Peter has walked up and he's seen, this guy knows me a lot better than I know myself. And so he'll say, I love you. As much as I know who I am and what I am, I believe I love you. And he'll tell him to feed his sheep. And he'll ask that 3 times, just like Peter rejects knowledge of the Messiah 3 times before he's crucified. Just a little bit later in John chapter 21, Jesus will 3 times ask him, does he love him? And he'll restore him. And he'll restore him back to a place of ministry. Peter knew things. Peter knew about Peter because Peter knew that Jesus knew about Peter. And so it's with that he has all of this information and this experience. And I would a whole lot rather talk to someone with an experience that has actually been and done that. And he knew about God's grace. And so he writes this letter. And he writes this letter to people he loves. I can just imagine him as he thinks back about his highlights. And Peter was really in touch with his low lives too, those low points in his life. But on the day of Pentecost, when people had come from all around, he preaches and the church is birthed on that day. He writes in this letter to at least two groups of people who are in that area of it. In other words, Cappadocia and I forgot what the other one is, but that he writes to, they were there that day of the birth of the church. And so he had known them for a season, for a while. He knows them, and he's their pastor, and he knows they're scattered, and he wants to communicate to them. And they receive that because he's a person with experience. So when he says Peter, and let's look at 1 Peter chapter 1. When he says Peter, an apostle of Jesus Christ, he uses the term Peter. He doesn't use Simon. He doesn't use Cephas. He uses Peter, a rock that best demonstrates who I am. See, when Peter thinks about it, Peter, if you think about when Peter grew up, he grew up in Bethsaida, and he's sitting there, and all they were known for is a fishing village. He never dreamed as a little boy, I'm going to be a part of something big, something that goes over the entire world. The entire world would know about me. His world was as big as that fishing village. In fact, he would move a little bit closer. When he gets married, he moves a little bit closer to Capernaum. In fact, they know where that house is, or they're pretty sure they found Peter's house. And there's a church today, and I've shown you that picture before. It looks kind of like a spaceship. There's a Catholic church over that site of Peter's house. And it stands between the synagogue and the water where they would go fish. There's all kind of sites around there. There's the site right there where they claim is Peter's house. There's a site just less than a mile on around the top edge of the Sea of Galilee. There's a statue where Jesus restores Peter. And he says Peter an apostle, not Peter the apostle, even though every time there's a list of the apostles, Peter's name is always listed first. Peter would remember all of the experiences he had. The transfiguration, he was there. The baptism, we have reason to believe he was there. All of these experiences, he was there. And so Peter ends up writing this letter. And so it's a letter that you need to read. It's a phone call that you need to answer. Because this is somebody that comes to us with shoe leather. He comes to us with an experience. You can't tell him, I denied Christ here. Peter said, been there. And Peter's telling you back the emotion and your feelings and everything. He said, Isn't it, when you talk to somebody who's been there, doesn't it make a difference? There have been people in this church that have listened to me preach and it didn't connect. Whatever their picture of me was, it just didn't connect. And then they've gone to lunch with somebody else in the church and they begin sharing their stories. And out of that experience, they say, you understand me. And it's through that they've come to know the Lord. Not through me. It's through their experience that they come to know the Lord. So Peter, just an apostle, just a rock that the church will be built upon. And here's what he says. We know who it's from. We know who it's to. The scattered, that were scattered for a season. But what does he want to communicate to them? Here's what he says. Look in verse 2. And all that said, the last line there, grace and peace be yours in abundance. Some translations say grace and peace be multiplied to you over and over and over again. You know, I find it interesting. He puts this at the very beginning of the letter. And I think that's interesting. You know, grace is, I wrote this down. Grace is getting everything for nothing when you don't deserve anything. Grace is getting everything for nothing when you don't deserve anything. And what's interesting is he puts this in the letter. He puts, he gives us assurance before he gives us an assignment. He tells us, I want you to have grace, before he tells them what he wants them to do, or before he gives them information. Think about it this way. You know, that football season, for all practical purposes, is already over. Nobody cares about pro football anymore. I don't even have a team anymore. They do away with my team. Anyway, that's my problem, not yours. But, you know, college football, it's over with. But you think about a kicker who's running out on the field to kick the game-winning field goal. If he can kick this field goal, they win. The coach brings him aside. This conversation can go one of two ways. One way is this way. Son, I am so proud of you. You know, you have kicked and won so many games for us. It doesn't matter. I am going to love you, and I am going to back you and support you and encourage you. This kick doesn't matter. What matters is you. You matter. Or here's the other conversation. Son, you better make this. This game is on the line. If you don't make this, you guys are going to be running tonight when this game's over until tomorrow morning at 5 o'clock. If you don't make this whole game rests on you. It's all up to you. We're depending on you. This is the kick that will define who you are as a person. If you don't do it, you're nothing. Now go out there. Which conversation do you want to be in? Does the performance matter or does it not matter? And so what Peter does here is he says grace and peace before anything else. He tells them grace and peace be yours multiplied. And I think the kind of grace that he's talking about here is not salvation grace, but it's kind of enduring grace. The Apostle Paul had a physical problem. It's probably something with his eyesight. It was a hindrance. He calls it a thorn in his flesh. And then he said this. He said, but the Lord had shown him that my grace is sufficient for you. That even though you have this thing that makes you not your best, God comes alongside and He gives grace. He gives grace for that. I experienced grace like crazy. We were joking the other day. Hopefully you're listening to the podcast, and hopefully you enjoy it. A lot of people enjoy that, but there's some things that come up in the podcast. There's some times people have asked, somebody asked Gail, or Gail asked us, do you and Olivia, do you write everything out? We don't write anything out. We just get in there and we start talking. Well, what I found out, because we start talking about words, and words matter. And so day before yesterday, it might have been yesterday, I learned that there's a word that I don't pronounce correctly, but all of you know. And I talk about the W-O-R-L-D, but I pronounce it W-O-R-L, the world, not the world. And so Olivia's saying, all through that, I'm trying to say a D, Dad, somewhere, say a D. I'm looking for a D. I can just pop on the end of that. And yet, with that, grace still happens. People are still encouraged. God shows up. God uses the frailty and the weakness to spread His word. And He says here, grace and peace, shalom. Peter says, I've known failure. I've known success. And I know the goodness of God. And wherever you are scattered in these areas of Asia Minor, wherever you are, I am praying that you will have God's empowering grace alongside of you. And I'm praying that you will understand His peace That wherever He has you, you will understand His peace. And that grace and that peace will be multiplied. If Peter were writing you this letter, he would say, wherever you find yourself Monday through Friday in the office, wherever you find yourself in the neighborhood, wherever you find yourself doing the things you don't look forward to doing, God's going to use it. And this comes from somebody that God has used. Peter said, if there was ever a time for God to give up on anybody, it would have been me. So listen what I'm telling you in this, because I've got perspective. I've got perspective. And He's earned our right and we owe Him our ear to listen to what He has to say because of His perspective. Peter sees a picture all too often we don't see. Andy saw a picture. Andy knew something that other people couldn't know. He knew something that Emma didn't know. He knew something that the crook definitely didn't know. The hotshot state policeman, he knew something that he didn't know. He knew that boat had a hole in it. Why? Because he had experienced it earlier. He knew that from experience. Peter brings all of his experience together to encourage each and every one of us where we live, scattered. He encourages us with grace and peace. And so that's why you're anxious to answer that phone call from Peter. That's why you're anxious to open this letter and read it from Peter. Because you understand and you know it's coming from somebody who's been there, who's been in your shoes, who's disappointed God as much as you have, and who has excited God as much as you have. He's been on both of those extremes. The guy that one minute he's telling the right thing and everybody's patting him on the back, and the other minute he's being disciplined and banished. He's been there. He knows it. And so because of that, the thing that He would want you and I to carry out through our day is grace and peace. Because it's going to be okay. It's going to be okay. It was okay with Him. In fact, it was so okay with Him. When it came time, there's an apocryphal. In fact, in studying this message, I came across this writing in one of the articles, a scholarly article I was reading. And this is not biblical. I'm not trying to say this is biblical, but there's a story told that Peter is in Rome, and he's under Nero's punishment, and Nero is, the army's trying to look for him. The Roman army's trying to look for him. And so the people tell him, Peter, you're too important. You've got to escape. The church has to have you. You're needed. You've got to escape. And so they make every way for him to escape. And as he's walking and leaving Rome, he meets Jesus on the way, and Jesus is coming back to Rome, walking into Rome. And he says, Jesus, where are you going? He says, I'm going to Rome to be crucified again. And Peter says, what? Well, yeah, Peter, because you're leaving. And Peter turns around and walks to Rome. That's the story that's told. Not sure that happened. But it gives a mindset that when it came time for Peter to be crucified, he gladly, in fact, he thought it was too much to be crucified in the same manner that Jesus was crucified. He said, crucify me upside down. Because I don't even deserve to die the way my Savior died. So Peter knows a lot. And he can tell us a lot. So put his number in your phone. Have his letter accessible to you over the next several months as we study and learn from this person who had walked the road, who had experienced all of those experiences of joy and disappointment, of excitement. It's almost like McKay used to say, agony of defeat, the thrill of victory and the agony of defeat. Peter was right there in them all. And how God could use him, it blew his mind. He never imagined. He could not see beyond that little fishing village just north of the Sea of Galilee. The Sea of Tiberias is what it was called. And look at what God did. And I just imagine what God can do with us. Father, thank you that you gave us this apostle of hope, but more so, this apostle of second chances. Thank you that with Peter, as you were patient and kind in dealing with him, we can trust that your patience in dealing with us. And so as we look into this book written by this apostle of second chances, may we be encouraged to take the next step in an ever-growing relationship with you. For it's in Christ's name I pray. Amen.
Hi, friends. I'm Olivia.
I'm Rod.
And you're listening to Just One More Thing from Sunrise Church. Welcome, everyone, to another episode of Just One More Thing from Sunrise Church. In today's episode, we will be covering the January 15th sermon titled The Apostle of Second Chances. I am going to start off by saying I noticed you were a little sleep deprived on this one. There were a couple moments where you stumbled on your words a little bit more than usual, maybe. What kept you up on this one? Why couldn't you get a good night's sleep before you preached?
Yeah, so I think you're very perceptive. You know, one of the things we want to do with Just One More Thing is we want to be open and honest, and we want to, at times, show you how the sausage is made. And so when you mentioned that after the service, I asked you, well, what do you mean? And what was the example you gave?
Well, for example, you said Caiaphas instead of Cephas when you were talking about Peter's name.
Yeah, and what had happened there was in the Aramaic, when you translate the Aramaic, it starts with a K. It's K-E-F-A-S, I believe, or F-I-S is the way it's transliterated. And so for some reason, that K was just stuck in my brain. You know, this goes back to the first sermon I preached for the first of the year, which is just like the Bereans in Acts chapter 17 and verse 11. The Bereans were a more noble character. You know, I appreciate listening to me, but go check it out to make sure what I'm saying is indeed lining up with the Word of God. So yes, that was a mistake. It's Cephas with a K in Aramaic transliteration. But I'll tell you what kept me up all night is the last thing that I do is come up with a video clip. And this is getting into how the sausage is made. Because I try to narrow down, okay, what do I want them walking out of there with? Now, there have been times when the video clip has come to me like a couple of weeks in advance, and that is very rare. Typically, I like to have the video clip around Thursday or Friday. Saturday, I'm starting to sweat if there's not a video clip that's set up. And to be fair, people expect a video clip from me. I was just wrestling, and I found a clip. When I say I found a clip came to me. There's a clip where Barney is going through the mail, and he's sitting here looking at this letter, and he can't determine, who sent it. And he's talking to Andy about it, and they have about a minute-long conversation about it. And finally, Andy says, well, why don't you just open it to find out who it's from? And I went through about 5 video clips looking for that. I had in my back pocket the one that I used about the hole in the boat, the perspective. But I really wanted us to to see that video clip about who this is from, because we don't have to guess. We know right up front who this is from. It's from Peter. And so Peter brings a track record. He brings a history that we're well aware of. And so I just wanted us to remember that. As it turned out, I used that video clip about the boat. I decided to go at it from the aspect of a perspective that Andy had. He had a bigger perspective than the head honchos. And I could make that work, but again, it wasn't perfect. Sometimes in sermon preparation, you feel like Jacob. You're just wrestling with God, and I guess that was my limp, because I do need a lot of sleep so I can be focused. I really do.
So you titled this sermon, The Apostle of Second Chances. Last week in the podcast, we did talk about the significance of Peter writing this letter and what it means for us to know that this was from Peter. But you went into a little more depth in this message to talk about who exactly Peter was. We haven't really gotten into First Peter yet. We're still kind of in an introduction. So do you want to talk about why you wanted to take another week just to look at Peter?
Well, I'm hoping that after last week, people might have started reading through the whole book of First Peter, and that God would show them some things in the book on their own. So I just didn't feel like I covered Peter enough. One of the things I did this time was I showed, when you say the rock, on this rock I will build my church, there was some Old Testament allusions that Peter would have thought about. And so I referenced those too. And of course, when Jesus in the Sermon on the Mount says, there's two, the person that built their house on the rock versus the person that built their house on the sand. So there's all of this imagery that flows through, and that imagery would have communicated something more than what we think. But Peter is the apostle of second chances. Some call him the apostle of hope, because we know so much about him, and yet, he had a huge misstep. When it came down to it, he did not do what he said he would do. He turned away from Christ. In fact, it is my contention that if we did not know the complete story, if the story would have just ended, say, with the resurrection, and then that was it, Christ rose and that's it, we would assume that Judas and Peter suffered the same fate. Because there's so much detail, so much space given to his denial of Christ. And so I just felt like it was for us to get to know him, not to assume that we know the writer of this book. The interesting thing to me was when we talk about Peter being the apostle of second chances, it's Christ who gives him a second chance. Christ could look at Peter and see his potential. And we didn't turn there, but the John 21 passage, I think it begins in verse 15, where he restores Peter. Jesus could look into that hurt, that guilt, all the things that was going on in Peter's head about, and beating himself up. And the space, the distance between who Peter was and who Christ desired him to be and what Christ saw he could become. And Jesus could speak into that space. And I think he does the same thing to us. He cheers us on to be all that he desires us to be. And then the step of faith is to step into that space and to take ownership, that for us to see ourselves the way Christ sees us. And so I really wanted people to come out of that with saying, hey, just like Peter had a second chance, God has taken second, third, fourth chances on me. And we need to have the courage to step into the space that God speaks into, and he desires for us and designs for us to step in that. And that's true discipleship. And I think that's what's going to happen as we study the book of First Peter. We're going to be given the opportunity to step into that space, to see what salvation means in its totality.
Well, I'll just say that thank you for breaking that down. But my greatest application of this sermon was that I can screen your calls. when your name shows up on my phone, I have permission from my pastor not to answer.
That's right.
So thank you for that and explaining a bit about the process, because that's an inside look that, I mean, we as your family sees it because we see you late at night looking for a clip, but they, as the congregation, don't necessarily see that process.
Yeah, because
play out.
it has to be the last thing.
Mm-hmm.
The only thing that comes after that is the title. And again, sometimes a clip sets the sermon up. Sometimes it explains it. I don't like giving too much away in the video clip. So, and I work clips very different from a lot of people, and they have to fit my kind of thinking.
Right. You're not building it off of the video clip. You're building it off of a biblical passage, and you happen to find
Correct.
a clip that helps.
And I usually like to start something with the video clip, and then I want us to get there at the same time, where we arrive at a place and go, oh, okay, now I see. And hopefully that work, that active listening that people do, will help them remember it much better.
Right. So yeah, it's great. And thank you for taking the time to break that down for us. And thank you all for listening to Just One More Thing from Sunrise Church.